Why did no one ever look her in the eye? That was the question Lena Ward asked herself every time she pushed another cart of ammunition across the deck of the carrier. The deck roared with engines, steel, and shouted orders, yet her presence was invisible. To the crew, she was just a loader, a nameless body in a blue deck shirt, hands that moved shells, not decisions. They liked it that way. She had made it easy for them to forget she was there. Head down. No stories. No chatter in the mess. Just work. That had been her rule since the day she signed papers that reduced her existence to shipboard logistics. But even the most disciplined silence can't hold forever. The jeers were subtle at first, a few voices cutting through the wind, out of the way, loader coming through. Laughter snapped across the deck like a whip. Others joined in. They thought it was harmless, a joke. She wasn't one of them, not really. She was background. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look up. She never did. The cart rattled as she shoved it forward, its wheels clanking over the steel plates. Each step was practiced. Not too fast to look eager, not too slow to look weak. A rhythm she had perfected over months of invisibility. Then the storm shifted. A gust rolled across the deck, strong enough to make even the chained-down Hornets shudder. It hit her cart like a fist, shaking the racks. One drum of 20 ammunition, heavy, steel, deadly if mishandled, broke free. It thundered loose, rolling across slick metal, straight toward a young sailor standing frozen in its path. No one moved. Not the yellow shirts directing aircraft, not the green shirts fixing tie-downs, not even the boy staring death in the face. No one except her. Her boots struck sparks on the wet deck as she slid low. She slammed her shoulder against the rolling drum, bracing it with her legs. Pain cracked through her body, but she dug her heels in, chalking it against the frame. The momentum shuddered to a halt. And in the same instant, she yanked the terrified sailor clear, dragging him by his vest just as the drum would have taken him down. Silence. Not applause, not even gratitude, just silence. Because when her sleeve tore back in the dive, something flashed under the light. Bronze and black, a circle stitched inside the fabric. A medal. Not the kind anyone on this ship should have. Not the kind anyone on this ship had ever seen. The boy she'd saved blinked at it, then another sailor, and another. Eyes widened, breath held. The shape was unmistakable, an eagle reversed, the outer ring black, the center bronze. It was the kind of metal whispered about in closed rooms, in stories buried so deep no one could prove they were real. A decoration tied to a mission declared impossible. A mission where every name had been listed as KIA. And yet here it was. Here she was. The air shifted with unease, louder than the jets screaming overhead. That was when a voice cut through the silence, a voice that had weight. "Where did you get that?" Admiral Hale. He had been walking the deck at that exact moment, watching everything as he always did. His gaze locked on her sleeve, then on her face. Lena felt her throat close. She pulled the cuff down slowly, covering the mark, pretending it was nothing, pretending she could disappear again. But she knew better. This wasn't going away, not now. The boy she'd saved was still staring at her, his mouth half open. He wanted to thank her, maybe, but the words never came, because gratitude wasn't what hung in the air anymore. Suspicion was. Hale's eyes didn't blink. He had seen it. He knew what it meant. And that was worse than if anyone else had. Because Hale was not the kind of man to let mysteries breathe on his deck. He turned on his heel and strode toward her. The crew stepped aside instinctively, like steel drawn to a magnet. The wind whipped his cap, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. She wanted to move, to retreat back into invisibility, but her boots felt welded to the deck. He stopped only a few feet from her cart. "Ma'am," he said, voice sharp enough to cut through jet wash, "hold your position." Her heart thudded. No one called her ma'am out here, not to a loader. She rested her hands on the cart's handles, knuckles white under her gloves. Calm face, blank eyes. That was the only armor she had left. "Roll your sleeve up," Hale ordered. "Sir," she said evenly, "I have a delivery to make. And I have an order to give. Sleeve, now." Every motion on the deck seemed to stall. Jets idled, crews slowed, eyes turned. Her jaw locked. For a split second she looked at the Hornet waiting for its load, then back at him. Her hand moved to her cuff. Stopped. "With respect, Admiral," she said quietly, "that's personal property." Hale didn't move. "I know exactly what it is." "Then you know it doesn't concern the chain of command." She pulled the cuff down tight. The tension between them was heavier than the ammunition she carried. He leaned closer. His voice dropped so only she could hear. "Come with me." There was no point refusing. She followed. He led her below deck, into a compartment stripped bare except for a steel table bolted to the floor. He shut the hatch behind them. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A small velvet box. He opened it. Inside sat the exact same metal mounted on a plaque. Bronze center, black ring, reversed eagle. "Tell me where you got it," he said. "You already know," she answered. "I want to hear it from you." "That's not going to happen." He studied her face. Not a twitch, not a blink. She was stone. "The last time I saw one of these," Hale said slowly, "it was handed to a widow at a closed casket funeral. Every recipient was listed as KIA. "Every reported recipient," she corrected softly. His eyes narrowed. "You're saying you survived that op?" "I'm saying nothing." The silence pressed like weight. "If that's true," Hale said at last, "you're carrying a secret that could tear open more than one sealed file in D.C. Then maybe it's better if we leave it sealed." He tapped the metal in the velvet box. "I can't do that, not without knowing exactly who I've got on my deck." "If you think I'm a danger," she said flatly, "lock me up. Otherwise, let me get back to work." Her voice didn't waver, but inside she was shaking, because she had lived years trying not to say these words, trying not to give anyone a reason to notice. He closed the box, slid it back into his pocket. "Fine," he said, "but hear me. If something happens out here, anything, you'll get one chance to prove whether you deserve that medal. Don't waste it." Her chest tightened. That was the last thing she wanted, a chance, because a chance meant disaster, and disaster meant people she couldn't save. But she said nothing. She just turned back toward the hatch. When she returned to the deck, the stairs were heavier than the ordnance she hauled. Whispers rippled. Stories spread. The metal was real. The past was real. And the clock was ticking. She pushed the cart again, moving the shells toward the waiting Hornet. But her mind wasn't on the load anymore. It was on the Admiral's voice. One chance. That was all he promised her. One chance to prove a past she had buried. She prayed that chance would never come. But the sea never listened to prayers. Why was the Admiral watching her? Lena could feel it even when his eyes weren't on her. From the island tower above the deck, his silhouette was always there. From the catwalks that ran along the edges, his shadow seemed to lean closer. She told herself it was paranoia, but the truth sat heavier. Hale had seen the metal. He had confronted her, and he was not the kind of man to let unanswered questions die. The carrier was a machine, steel, turbines, wires, and people. Every piece had a purpose, and the Admiral was its heart. His rhythm dictated theirs. His silence weighed more than any order barked through comms. If he had decided to put his attention on her, then the whole machine would follow. And it did. It started in the mess hall. Whispers at first. A young ordnance tech named leaned in close to another sailor, his voice pitched low but not low enough. "You saw it right on her sleeve, bronze center, black ring." The other sailor shook his head. "That's not a real medal, has to be some knockoff, something she stitched on for herself." His face hardened. You think the Admiral would stop her over a fake? That landed heavier. Conversations tapered into silence when Lena walked in for her tray. She didn't look at anyone. She never did. She sat in the corner, back to the wall, eyes on her food but mind far away. She had been invisible once. Now she was something worse, a rumor. The air around her buzzed with half-believed stories. Some said she was part of an experimental unit that vanished in a desert no one could name. Others said she'd been on a raid that was erased from records before it was even debriefed. Some whispered darker things, that she hadn't survived, not really, that she was a ghost walking in a borrowed body. The worst part, she didn't correct any of it, because the truth was no safer than the lies. She kept her hands steady as she ate. Bite, chew, swallow, simple motions. Don't let them see the tremor in your fingers. Don't let them know you're breaking inside. Later on the deck, she worked with the same practice precision. Ammo drums from the elevator, chains clipped to pallets, racks pushed across slick steel. Her movements were clean, efficient, invisible, or they had been. Now eyes followed her. The same sailors who had mocked her as just a loader now paused, hesitant, measuring her. She hated it. She wanted to shout, "I'm nothing, I chose this. Leave me invisible." But invisibility was gone. Above in the control room, Hale watched too. His report had confirmed the shape. His own eyes had confirmed the stitching. The box in his cabin confirmed the weight. There was no doubt. Lena Ward carried a metal tied to a mission every briefing had erased. And if she carried it, then one of the Navy's darkest secrets had been walking his deck unnoticed for months. That unsettled him more than any hostile radar ping. He remembered the after-action reports, sanitized, whole units reduced to black lines and redacted names. One entry had stuck with him, not for what it said, but for what it avoided. A phrase buried in legal language, reassignment at member request, rehabilitation pathway confidential. It was bureaucratic poetry for hiding ghosts. Now a ghost stood in his hangar bay. Hale's XO had warned him to let it go. Intel officers had reminded him of jurisdictional boundaries. The JAG had cushed everything in words that meant nothing but carried sharp edges underneath. But Hale wasn't a man who ignored instincts. And his instinct said this woman was not just a ghost. She was a variable, one that could save or sink his ship. He wasn't willing to gamble. So he tested her. It started small. Safety audits disguised as routine, spill drills, tie-down evaluations. He didn't name her, didn't single her out, but each time she was in the lane where failure would cut deepest. Each time he watched. And each time she passed. Not loudly, not with bravado, but with a kind of quiet clarity that unsettled him more than it reassured him. She caught frayed lanyards before they snapped, adjusted hose angles before they chafed, moved crew like chess pieces without them even realizing they were being moved. It was the kind of competence you couldn't fake. Notice, too, he found himself watching her more than his clipboard. When a drill called for a spill response, she was already placing kits before the petty officer finished instructions. When a tie-down test flagged, she corrected it without looking at the manual. Didn't feel like he was watching a peer. He felt like he was watching an instructor. And it gnawed at him. Because no one had told him she was supposed to be one. That night Lena sat alone in the locker room. Her shirt hung damp on the hook, her hands pressed against her thighs, steady, always steady. But her mind ran. Every time she tried to disappear, the world dragged her back. Every time she chose silence, someone demanded answers. And now the Admiral had seen the metal. She pulled her personal kit from the locker, unzipped the side pouch, and checked the cloth-wrapped shape inside. The metal sat there, the stitching worn but strong. She stared at it for a long moment. The weight was worse than lead. She whispered to herself, "I didn't want this anymore." But wanting didn't matter. The past didn't care about what she wanted. It cared about what it demanded. And Admiral Hale demanded something too. The next morning he intercepted her on the catwalk. His pace was slow, deliberate, but his eyes were sharp. "You ever been in a storm where the sea looks flat until it lurches?" he asked. She didn't answer. "That's what today feels like," he said. He didn't accuse, he didn't praise, he just walked beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Legal won't let me ask you about things I can't know. Intel can't tell me what they're not permitted to see, but this ship is my responsibility, and that includes the human variables. So I'm going to keep putting you where your decisions matter." She stopped, turned her head just enough. "You can be angry about that later," he added. Her jaw clenched. "What do you want from me?" "Truth," he said. "You won't get it." "Then I'll take proof." Her silence was an answer. He let it hang, then said softly, "When you made your choice in that bay, what did you evaluate first?" Her throat tightened. She didn't want to answer, but her mouth betrayed her. "Which action turned 3 problems into 0. He nodded slowly. "And how did you pick it?" "By removing choices that created new risks." "Why move yourself instead of ordering the crew chief?" She looked at him flat and unblinking. Distance, angle. The math sat between them. Hale didn't smile, he didn't thank her, he just exhaled. "Hiding isn't an option anymore. Neither is theater. If you're on my deck, you'll be used where you make the ship better." She finally faced him fully, her voice steady. "I'm here to carry my weight." "Good," he said, "because the ocean doesn't care about our backstories." He walked away, leaving her with the hum of engines and the weight of what he'd just promised. She wasn't invisible anymore. And she would never be again. Why were their voices always just low enough to sting? Lena Ward kept her eyes on the steel beneath her boots as she crossed the deck with another ammunition cart. The jets thundered above her. Radios cracked. Commands echoed. It should have drowned out everything else. But no matter how loud the carrier became, she could still hear them. The whispers. They followed her everywhere now. In the mess, on the catwalks, even in the maintenance bay when she thought she was alone. Bronze center, black ring, you know what that means. No one was supposed to survive that op. You think she killed for it? Maybe she's the reason the rest didn't make it. She didn't react, never did. The only weapon she had left was silence, but silence was starting to feel like surrender. Every word chipped at the armor she'd built. For months she'd been just another loader, another body in blue, invisible among hundreds. She had chosen this life for one reason: it allowed her to vanish, but the metal had ruined that. And now invisibility was gone. The looks cut deeper than the whispers. Sailors who once brushed past her without noticing now stepped aside, eyes darting to her sleeve as if the metal would burn through fabric. Some avoided her completely, steering wide around her carts. Others stared too long, measuring her, trying to match rumor to reality. She hated both. What she hated more was herself, for letting that flash of bronze show. One mistake, one torn cuff, and everything she had buried was clawing its way back into the light. In the island above, Admiral Hale leaned against a steel railing, watching. He didn't need to eavesdrop to know what was happening below. Sailors lived on stories, and a ghost wearing a metal no one should have was the kind of story that spread faster than jet fuel on open steel. Morale was a fragile thing. It could be sharpened by myth, but it could just as easily fracture under it. And Hale would not let his deck fracture. So he tested her again. He called for an audit on deck choreography. On paper, it was routine. In practice, it was an evaluation not of systems but of Lena Ward. Could she hold the line when every eye turned toward her? The crew didn't know she didn't know, but Hale did. He stood off to the side, arms folded, expression unreadable, while the petty officer called steps. The drill began, crew moved, lines shifted, lanyards snapped taut, fuel hoses traced arcs across the deck. Everything looked like chaos to the untrained eye, but Lena saw patterns, always patterns. She spotted a frayed edge on a clip that would have failed under tension, swapped it without announcement, logged it without fuss. She traced a hose that bent across a ladder edge and adjusted its angle before anyone tripped. She didn't talk. She didn't point. She just acted. When the petty officer called for volunteers to lead a simulated spill, Lena didn't step forward. She never did. But when the clock started, she was already moving kits into corners, cutting response times in half without anyone realizing she'd planned it. Noticed. He was younger, less certain, but he wasn't blind. He replayed her moves in his head even after the drill ended. She didn't move like a gambler. She didn't roll dice and hope. She calculated. Angles, mass, slope, timing. The way she had inside the bay when the ammo drum rolled. It wasn't luck. It was skill honed under fire. And couldn't stop asking himself, fire where? That night in the mess, the story spread again. The incident was told and retold, each sailor sharpening the details. Some described her slide across the deck with theatrical hand motions. Others swore they saw sparks fly from her boots. By the time the tale circled the table, she had practically lifted the drum with one hand. Lena sat alone, spoon moving through her food. She didn't listen, she didn't correct, she didn't exist. At least that's what she told herself. But she did exist because kept watching her, because whispers kept growing, because Hale kept testing her. She walked the long passage beneath the island that night, her usual reset. The brass sign at the junction gleamed faintly in the low light. She stopped beneath it, leaned her shoulder against cool steel and breathed twice. A pause, a reset. Then she moved on. If anyone had seen her, they would have called it nothing. But for her, it was survival. Up on the island, Hale spoke quietly with his XO. If we're wrong about her, what failure mode should I expect? The XO didn't flinch. Hesitation at the wrong second, or improvisation that breaks sequence. But the bigger risk is crew misreading you, creating a cult around her. Hale exhaled. We don't do cults, we do standards. Treat her like a standard, use her where she's strong, document it. Operational necessity, the XO said. Not myths. Hale nodded once. He didn't like the word myths. Myths had cost him men before. Myths got people killed. So he decided something quietly. He would put Lena where decisions mattered, but he would not let myth define her. Proof, not stories. That was his way. The next morning the deck woke to the same chaos. Jets fueled, carts rattled, crews signaled. The sea stretched endless and unforgiving. Lena moved through it all like she always did, steady, precise, unremarkable. Except now she wasn't unremarkable. Approached her with a clipboard, asking a procedural question he already knew the answer to. His tone careful, like a student asking an instructor. She gave him the answer, then one sentence more, enough context to let him make a better choice next time. He walked away taller by half an inch. She hated herself for it. Because teaching was attention, and attention was danger. But she couldn't help it. Competence was contagious. She learned that long ago. From the island, Hale adjusted the day's cycle. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible, just subtle shifts that placed Lena where friction lived. Each adjustment looked routine on paper, but in practice it was controlled exposure. Pressure in small doses, enough to measure her without breaking her. He didn't admit it, not even to himself, but he was beginning to see a shape. Not a ghost, not a myth. A person who carried weight exactly where a ship needed it most, in the seconds that decided whether men lived or died. By evening, whispers had sharpened into questions with no answers, and questions on a carrier were as dangerous as storms. Lena lay in her rack, eyes open, counting breaths. Above her, steel hummed with the ship's heart. She told herself she didn't care, but the truth was harder. She cared. Not about the whispers, not about the Admiral's suspicion. She cared because the metal in her locker would never stop demanding. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a debt. And debts don't disappear. She closed her eyes and told herself one more lie. That the sea would let her keep disappearing. But the sea never did. What would it take to shatter the silence she had fought so hard to keep? The answer came sooner than Lena Ward expected. The afternoon sky had shifted, a weather front curling in from the horizon, wind clawing harder across the bow. The carrier's rhythm faltered. Pilots in the air called down for adjustments. Deck crews scrambled to tighten their pace. Lena was halfway across the deck with another load of ammunition when the alarm hit. Short, sharp, urgent. Inbound supply high-low, mechanical issue, unstable approach. The words alone were enough to tighten every jaw on deck. A carrying racks of ordnance was coming in hot, tail rotor straining to keep alignment. Lena froze for half a second, cart rattling in her grip. A dozen scenarios flashed through her head, each one worse than the last. Then instinct buried hesitation. She moved. The tilted as it touched down harder than it should have, skids scraping steel. Inside, an unsecured ammo drum rolled loose, clattering like thunder in the bay. A live container, heavy enough to kill on impact, now sliding toward the open hatch. The crew chief inside yelled over the comms, "We've got a live drum loose." Admiral Hale was already on the deck, moving toward the landing zone. But Lena was faster. She crossed the distance in a straight line, boots hammering steel. No hesitation, no permission asked. She ducked into this bay, her body low against the tilt. The drum, massive and rolling slow but unstoppable, bore down toward the edge. Her back slammed against the frame. She caught it with her boots first, pain flaring through her legs, then hooked her arm around the chalk lever. The weight pressed down like a crushing tide. "Get clear," the crew chief shouted. She ignored him. One twist, one sharp motion, the chalk locked, the drum shuddered, stopped. Her hands shook as she jammed the pin through. Only then did she let go. The helicopter groaned, frame strained, balance off kilter. One wrong throttle push could tip the whole bird. She slid out, sweat streaking her face beneath the cranial helmet. Hale was at the hatch, his voice low, steady. "You just took a calculated risk." "You calculated right." "I did my job," she replied, stepping past him. But the danger wasn't done. This cargo shift had dug one skid into the deck. The pilot throttled, straining to lift, but the bird rocked dangerously. If they pushed wrong, it could tip, blades, steel, and ordnance tearing across the deck. Hale barked into his mic, "Clear LZ-1 now." Lena didn't wait to be told. She moved to the skid, eyes scanning the contact point. Her hand signals relayed to the crew, "Adjust, shift, clear." The pilot feathered power, the skid came free. The lifted, hovered, then pulled away toward maintenance. The deck exhaled. Hale stepped in front of her, blocking her path back to the ammo cart, his eyes sharp, his voice pointed. "That's twice in one day you've been in the wrong place at the right time," he said. "You sure you're just a loader?" "I'm sure I'm doing my job," she said evenly. Jobs don't usually come with instincts like that. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Words would betray her more than silence. By evening, the story had already spread. Told it twice in the mess before another sailor cut in. "Yeah, and guess who was first inside The tale sharpened with each retelling. Soon, everyone knew. The loader had stopped a live drum from rolling over the edge. Hale watched the replay in his office later. Grainy footage from the bay. Frame by frame, Lena's movements unfolded, her slide, her lock, her precision. It was the movement of someone who'd done it before, under fire. He leaned back, the screen frozen on her securing the pin. His mind replayed an after-action report from years ago, a mission where no one survived, a mission whose medal he now carried in a velvet box. This wasn't coincidence. He sent for her file. When it arrived, it looked like a blackout poem, names erased, dates blurred, language so careful it said almost nothing. But at the bottom, a single line forced him still: reassignment at member request. Rehabilitation pathway confidential. They hadn't buried her completely, they'd just hidden her. But hiding wasn't working anymore. Meanwhile, Lena stripped off her gear in the locker room, hung her blue shirt on the hook, and sat for a long moment. Her hands were steady, but her chest burned. She opened her kit, pulled the pouch, touched the metal. The stitching was worn but strong. It should have been buried with her years ago. Yet here it was, still binding her to the past she had tried to erase. She whispered to herself, "Every time I try to disappear." The words trailed off. Above, the Admiral was already moving pieces. He didn't speak her name aloud. He didn't have to. He simply placed her where friction lived. The next day, when the deck crew ran drills, she was measured again. She didn't notice, but did. He noticed everything. The way she corrected a snagged hose before it frayed. The way she placed kits in corners before anyone called for them. The way she gave him one word of instruction that made his whole section sharper. He wasn't sure if he admired her or feared her, maybe both. And he wasn't the only one. Because whispers were mutating again, from suspicion into awe, from ridicule into respect. But awe was dangerous, respect could be poison. Lena didn't want either, she just wanted the silence back. She walked the long passage beneath the island again that night, stopped under the brass sign, took her 2 breaths, but this time she didn't feel reset. She felt cornered. Because the Admiral had said something she couldn't forget. If something happens out here, you'll get one chance to prove whether you deserve that medal. There had been that chance. And she had proven it. Now she was trapped. Because proving it once only meant she would be asked to prove it again. And again. Until the past she carried swallowed her whole. How many times could she stay invisible in plain sight before someone forced her into the light? That was the question that haunted Lena Ward in the days after the. She had told herself it had been a one-time thing, a reflex, a mistake, something she could bury under silence and routine. But the deck didn't forget. Sailors passed her with quick nods now, not jeers, lingered near her lane too often. Even the petty officers measured her with the kind of glances reserved for someone who carried weight beyond their rank. And above them all, Admiral Hale never stopped watching. He didn't hover, he wasn't careless, but she knew. She could feel his eyes on her from the island windows, from the catwalk rails, from the periphery of every drill. The Admiral had the gaze of a man who catalogued, not admired. Every move she made went into a ledger. She hated that ledger. Because it wasn't just numbers, it was her. Hale had already begun changing the rhythm of the ship around her. Not openly, not enough for anyone else to see, but Lena recognized patterns she always had. Drills reshuffled so that she landed in positions where the seams would tear first. Fuel audits timed so she crossed the most vulnerable hoses. Tie-down evaluations scheduled when she was on shift. Each time, she found herself standing where failure would have hit hardest. Each time, she corrected it before failure arrived. And each time, the Admiral logged another proof. To the crew, it looked like chance. To Lena, it felt like a trap. One evening, after another routine safety evaluation, stopped her in the narrow corridor leading to the mess. He held his clipboard like a shield, nerves chewing at the edges of his words. "You always see it before the rest of us," he said. She kept walking. "No, really," he pressed. "That fuel line, you knew it was going to snag before it did. How?" Her jaw tightened. She wanted to tell him nothing, to brush past, but his eyes were too wide, too eager, too trusting. He reminded her of someone she used to know, someone who had asked the same questions once, before a mission no one survived. She gave a flat look, "Because I've seen it before." Then she walked away. He didn't chase her, but the question hung in the air long after her boots faded down the passage. That night she sat on the bench in the locker room, kit unzipped, metal in her hand. She stared at it for a long time, fingers tracing the worn stitching. Every time she touched it, memories clawed up. Fire, steel, dust, the names of people she hadn't spoken in years. The moment her radio went silent and she realized she was the only one left. The Navy had offered her two choices afterward: disappear into medical discharge and watch herself rot in civilian life, or bury her name under paperwork and keep moving freight on steel decks. She had chosen the latter, not because it was noble, but because it kept her from being alone. But now the Admiral was peeling away the silence she had paid for. Hale wasn't blind to her tension. He noticed the way her jaw set when she was tested. He saw the fraction of a second she hesitated before stepping into another drill. He knew she hated it. But he didn't care. Because his responsibility wasn't her comfort, it was the ship. He met with his XO in the quiet of the ops deck one night, glass windows reflecting the glow of radar screens. "She doesn't grandstand," Hale said. "Doesn't talk, but when pressure comes she doesn't just react, she reshapes it. That's the difference." The XO didn't argue. "You going to pull her up?" "Not yet. Rumor is sharp enough already. If I put stripes where she stands, half the crew will see a savior and the other half a fraud." "So you keep testing her?" "I keep watching," Hale corrected. The XO studied him. "You think she's a risk?" Hale didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on the deck below, where the night crews pushed carts under floodlights. "I think she's the kind of variable that saves lives or costs them." The XO nodded once. "Then you'd better know which." Down below, Lena finished another shift and walked the long passage under the island. The brass sign at the junction caught her again. She stopped, leaned against the frame, breathed twice. But this time the reset didn't work, because she could feel the Admiral's eyes on her, even in the silence. The next morning brought another test. Not officially, of course. On paper it was a spill containment drill. But Lena recognized the trap immediately. The crew moved too slow, the kits too far, the sequence designed to fail unless someone cut corners. She didn't cut corners. She moved early, placing response kits before the clock even started. She shortened the path before anyone knew there was a path. By the time the alarm sounded, the crew was already half a step ahead, not because of them, but because of her. Was part of the team. He realized only afterward what she had done, that she had been shaping the drill long before the petty officer barked orders. He looked at her differently after that, not with awe, not with fear, but with something more dangerous: respect. That evening in the mess, he leaned across the table and said, "You're not just a loader, we all see it." Lena froze, the spoon halfway to her mouth. She lowered it slowly, her voice steady but edged. "You don't see anything." Frowned. "I do, we all do. You." "Enough." Her voice cut sharper than she intended. The table went silent, heads turned, whispers hummed like static. She pushed her tray away and left without finishing. In his cabin, Hale read the daily reports in silence. One line stood out: spill containment drill completed in record time, sequence smoother than baseline. He didn't need the paperwork to know why. He had seen it from the island. Every test he set, she passed. Every friction point, she dissolved. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket, set it on the table, and stared at it. The metal inside wasn't proof of the past. It was proof of a pattern. A pattern Lena Ward carried, whether she admitted it or not. The question wasn't if she would be tested again. The question was when. And whether she would survive it. Why did the sea always choose its moment when you least expected it? The horizon had been calm that morning. Clear skies, steel blue water, the carrier cutting a steady wake. But by evening the wind shifted. Clouds stacked dark and heavy, a wall of storm crawling in from the west. The ocean was moving and everyone on deck felt it. Lena Ward had been through storms before. She knew the rhythm, the way the deck rolled, the way the air thickened, the way voices sharpened against the howl. She moved carts as ordered, tied down racks, checked lanyards twice. She kept her head low like always. But storms have a way of stripping things bare. The first gust knocked an antenna off balance. The second ripped a tarp free. The third slammed against a mid-lift, tilting it just enough to make the deck crew scramble. Alarms rang, radios barked, orders collided in the air. And Lena felt it in her chest, the shift from routine to chaos. There was still tethered, blades chopping hard against the wind. Its cargo, more ordnance than anyone liked to admit, shook against its lashings. One bad gust and the load would break loose, turning into steel missiles across the deck. The petty officer on comms froze for half a second. Too many problems at once, too many voices shouting. Lena didn't freeze. She was already moving, boots cutting slick arcs across the rain-swept steel. She caught the nearest lashing, yanked it tight, then braced against the skid. Her voice cut sharper than the storm. "Shift crew port side, weight balance." The words weren't hers to give. She wasn't a leader. She wasn't even supposed to speak. But the sailors heard her anyway. Something in her tone didn't ask, it commanded. And they obeyed. Hands grabbed lines. Shoulders pressed into steel. Together, they steadied the just long enough for the pilot to feather power and lift clear. The carrier shuddered under the wind. The sea slammed harder. And Lena stood in the rain, breath sharp, knowing she had just betrayed herself again. Above, from the island, Admiral Hale hadn't moved an inch during the chaos. His eyes stayed on her the entire time. He didn't need the radio to know whose voice had cut through the noise. He had heard it. Calm, precise, decisive. The same voice he'd heard described in reports that were never meant to reach daylight. When the deck settled, when the cleared, when the alarms wound down, Hale descended. He didn't walk fast. He didn't need to. The crew parted for him without a word. He found Lena near the lashings, rain dripping off her cranial. She was checking knots like nothing had happened, like her voice hadn't steadied the entire deck. "Load her," he said, low and even. She turned, expression blank. "You just overrode my petty officer." "I stabilized equipment," she replied. "You gave orders." "I gave instructions that saved your—" The silence between them was heavier than the storm. Hale's eyes locked on hers. "You want to explain how a loader knew exactly how to balance 6 tons of helicopter against wind shear?" Her jaw clenched. "No, sir." For a moment he almost smiled. Not amusement, recognition. "You don't get to stay invisible anymore," he said. She broke eye contact, turning back to the knots. "I never asked for visibility." "Storms don't ask permission," Hale replied. The conversation ended there, but the damage was done. The deck crew knew what they'd heard. Most of all, he couldn't stop replaying the sound of her voice. The steadiness, the absolute clarity. It wasn't the voice of a loader. It was the voice of someone who had stood in chaos before and survived it. Later that night in the mess, whispers sharpened into something else entirely. Not suspicion, not rumor, something closer to reverence. She knew what to do before anyone else. She saved, though. She gave orders like she'd been doing it her whole life. And beneath it all, quiet words. She's not who she says she is. Lena ate in silence, every muscle taut. She hated the storm more for this than the wind or the rain. The storm had stripped her mask. When she returned to her rack, she opened the pouch again. The metal gleamed faint in the low light. "Every time," she whispered, fingers trembling against the stitching. "Every damn time it drags me back." Up in his cabin, Hale sat alone, the velvet box open on his desk. His metal gleamed too, its bronze catching the lamp. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered to himself, "Ghosts don't stay buried in storms." The storm outside roared on, pounding steel, testing rivets, testing men. And down below, Lena lay awake, knowing the sea had spoken. She would not disappear again. How many secrets can survive once the sea forces them into the open? The storm had not broken. It clawed through the night, waves pounding steel, rain striking like shards, wind tearing at everything unsecured. The carrier had weathered worse, but worse wasn't measured in storms alone. It was measured in timing. And timing had chosen now. At 200, the klaxon screamed again. Fire on hangar deck, starboard bay. The words sliced through the storm like a blade. Every sailor on watch bolted into motion. Fires on carriers weren't accidents. They were chain reactions waiting to kill. Lena Ward was already running before her name was called. Boots hammering wet steel, she followed the orange glow leaking through the hangar doors. Inside, sparks spit from a ruptured junction box. A spilled line had ignited, licking flames up the wall toward suspended racks. It was the nightmare scenario, fire near ordnance. The petty officer on scene froze for half a beat too long. Too many calculations. Too many voices shouting over one another. Lena didn't hesitate. Flood suppression now, she barked. Port side crew sweep right, starboard form a line. Her voice cracked across the chaos like a whip. The crew obeyed without question. Foam hissed. Water surged. Flames snapped back under the assault. But the danger wasn't over. The racks above were swaying, chains strained by the storm's roll. One broke, a crate crashing down in sparks and smoke. Lunged toward it too slow. Lena was already there. She caught the edge, shoved it clear of the spreading flames, then rolled to shield from falling debris. Her arms shook from the impact, but she didn't stop moving. Secondary suppression now. Within minutes the fire was contained. Steam and smoke hung thick, choking the bay. Crew coughed, faces streaked with soot. But the ordnance was safe. The ship was safe. And Lena Ward was no longer invisible. Every sailor who had been there had heard her voice, had followed her orders, had seen her move faster than anyone else. When Admiral Hale arrived, the fire already beaten, the crew stood in scattered silence, staring at the one person who shouldn't have been leading them but had. Hale's eyes found hers through the haze. "You," he said softly, almost to himself. Lena didn't look away. She couldn't. Her chest heaved with smoke, her throat raw, her hands blackened, but her eyes stayed steady. "I didn't do it for you," she said quietly. "I know," Hale replied. The XO stepped forward. "Sir, she overrode." "She saved the bay," Hale cut him off. His tone left no room for argument. He turned back to Lena. For the first time his voice wasn't testing. It wasn't suspicious. It was resolute. "You're not invisible anymore. As of now, you're acting deck lead, full authority equal to the boss until I say otherwise." The word struck the bay like a hammer. Sailors stiffened. Some exchanged glances. His mouth fell open. Lena froze, her gut twisted. She wanted to refuse, to throw the weight back at him, but she couldn't, because she had just proven again that she couldn't not act. And Hale had seen it. Her voice was steady, though it cut her to say it. "Yes, sir." That night the storm howled harder, but the hangar was calm. Repairs, chains tightened, fire-black scars scrubbed away. And everywhere Lena walked, eyes followed her. Not with whispers this time, with something heavier. Respect. She didn't want it, she hated it, but it clung to her now like the smell of smoke. In the mess the next morning, sat across from her without asking permission. His face was bruised from falling debris, his arm wrapped, but his eyes burned with conviction. "You saved me," he said. Lena shook her head. "I saved the crate." "You saved me," he repeated firmer. She didn't answer. Leaned in. "The Admiral was right. You're not just here to load ammo, you're here for us." Her chest tightened. She pushed her tray away. "Don't make me into something I'm not." But didn't back down. "Too late, you already are." Later, she walked the long passage under the island again. The brass sign gleamed dimly in the storm lights. She stopped, leaned her shoulder, breathed her 2 breaths. But this time she wasn't alone. Hale's voice came from the shadows behind her. "You hate it, don't you?" She didn't turn. What? Being seen. Her throat worked before she answered. It was supposed to be over. "Ghosts don't stay buried," Hale said. She turned then, her face raw, her eyes tired. "I'm not your ghost. I'm just trying to carry my weight." "And you are," Hale said. His tone softened, almost reflective. "But don't lie to yourself, Ward. You're carrying more than your own. You always have." Silence stretched between them. The storm outside rattled steel like bones. Finally, Lena whispered, "It never ends, does it?" Hale shook his head. "Not for people like you." She closed her eyes, exhaling hard. The storm outside raged on. The storm inside her chest raged harder. And she knew then there was no going back. The metal in her locker wasn't just a relic. It was a shadow, one she could never outrun. What happens when the thing you've been running from becomes the only thing keeping others alive? The storm finally broke by morning. The sea calmed, clouds peeled back, and sunlight cracked across the endless horizon. But inside the carrier, the air was still heavy. The crew carried new weight now, not just from the damage or the fire or the near misses. From her, Lena Ward. No one said her name out loud in the mess, but every head turned when she entered. Sailors gave her space, not out of fear but out of something sharper: recognition. She hated it. She kept her head down, hands steady on her tray, eating in silence. But silence didn't erase the fact that she had been the one whose voice cut through smoke, whose hands caught the crate, whose orders saved the hangar. She wasn't a loader anymore, not to them. And not to Admiral Hale. He called her into his quarters later that day. The room was spare: steel walls, a narrow desk, a porthole still streaked with rain. The Admiral sat with his back straight, his eyes steady, a small velvet box resting in front of him. She stopped short when she saw it. Her throat tightened. He tapped the lid once with his finger. "You know what this is?" She didn't move. He opened it. The metal gleamed in the light. Bronze center, black ring. The one no one was supposed to survive. Her chest burned. "Where did you get that?" "It was delivered to me years ago," he said, "after a mission I signed off on. A mission that came back empty." Her stomach twisted. She had sworn never to hear those words again. "You weren't supposed to survive," Hale said softly. "I didn't," she whispered. For a long time neither spoke. The hum of the ship was the only sound, steady as a heartbeat. Finally Hale closed the box. "You've been trying to disappear, but disappearing isn't an option anymore. Not here, not after what the crew's seen." Her hands curled into fists. "I never asked to lead." "I know," he said. "That's what makes you dangerous and valuable." She shook her head, turning away, staring out the streaked porthole. "Every time I step forward, people get hurt. That metal doesn't mean victory. It means loss. It means I was the last one breathing when better people were." Hale stood slowly, walking to her side. His voice dropped low, reflective. "Metals don't measure perfection. They measure weight carried. Sometimes more than one person should. Sometimes more than anyone should." She swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in her eyes. "I don't want them to follow me." "They already are," Hale said, "and you don't have a choice in that. The only choice you have now is how you carry it." Her breath shuddered. She closed her eyes, forcing control back into her chest. When she opened them, the storm outside had faded. The sea stretched endless calm, but inside she knew calm wasn't coming for her. She walked out of the Admiral's quarters that afternoon with no stripes, no ceremony, no announcement. But word spread anyway. The crew didn't need paperwork. They had seen enough. On deck, passed her with a nod, his arm still in a sling. His eyes held no awe now, no boyish hero worship. only respect. She returned the nod, nothing more. Hours later, as the sun sank into the horizon, she stood alone on the deck. Jets were secured, carts lashed, the sea breath steady beneath steel. She touched the pouch on her sleeve, the hidden metal pressing faint against her skin. She thought about fire, about loss, about ghosts that never stayed buried. And she thought about the sailors who had followed her voice into smoke, who had trusted her without question. For the first time, she let herself breathe without resistance. The Admiral's words echoed in her head. The only choice you have now is how you carry it. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood there, shoulders squared against the wind, her silence saying everything her voice never would. Because sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes resilience doesn't roar. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And on that carrier in that storm, in those moments that decided life or death, Lena Ward had acted. And that was enough.